Hi, everybody. This is Charles Hoskinson broadcasting live from warm, sunny Colorado. It's almost 10 o'clock at night, but we're all under quarantine here. The state's completely shut down, except for essential travel. In fact, if you're caught in the streets, they'll throw you in jail if you don't have a good excuse for it. $5,000 fine and 18 months in prison. So I guess they're taking this quarantine thing pretty seriously. But I do have a nice farm, and my home office is quite comfortable and has good internet, as good as we can get it, given being out here on the farm. So I still can reach all you guys, and I hope everyone is doing quite well. Thank you so much for showing up. Anyway, the purpose of this video is a little bit free form, but I did want to provide a slight update. So we are going to have our next product management update come March 31st. And this one is, unlike the last one, going to be live. So I believe there's going to be an opportunity for Q&A, and it's a great opportunity for you guys to get to know most of our product managers. We're still bringing some product managers online. But those product managers that are participating are covering a large chunk of the entire Cardano product. And hopefully we'll be able to get some other senior personnel involved as well, like our CTO, Romain, and Jer Maroney, and Tamara, and others, so that you guys can see a very diverse sampling of people. It would also be very nice to see if we can get a Yoroi update as well from either Nico or Sebastian. It's a good opportunity for it, given that it's on a monthly cadence. Many of you saw the video that Tim made today. If you go to our IOHK YouTube channel, you can see the Byron reboot video that we just launched today. And that covers a lot of the USBs of the reboot and explains why the reboot is such a significant event for us. We're also preparing a lot of content on the reboot in general, so look for blog posts and media stuff and videos and so forth. We're going to roll that out. And we're preparing some Hydra-specific content as well. We've been writing a lot about Hydra. We're trying to get it out to the general public. In terms of releases, Aparna is going to announce the reboot. But as I mentioned in my prior video, it is imminent, and it's going to be a rolling launch. So we'll probably do the command line version of it for enterprises and exchanges. That's the node with the wallet backend. And then the next launch, which will be shortly thereafter, will likely be the GUI on top of that. You do these rolling releases because there's different people who have to upgrade in different orders. That said, we have been toying with the idea of copying what Google's been doing with Chrome and Canary, having Chrome Canary and regular Chrome, where Canary is the kind of the experimental rapid prototype build, and then regular Chrome is what the mainstream uses, to do that with Daedalus, because Daedalus is somewhat decoupled from the rest of the stack. We could do rapid upgrades on a weekly basis with it, just like we're doing weekly upgrades with the incentivized testnet. So we're pretty excited, actually, about all of this, and we're really excited to see that as we enter into April, we're going to have a completely different way of communicating and releasing software than we have over the last 18 months. So it's been very nice as a CEO to see all these things come together. We had the resilience and the dogged determination to just keep trying and just keep trying and trying until we got to a point where we found something that worked well for us, given that we didn't want to compromise on the integrity and so forth of the product. More papers are coming out. Some of you noticed that we published 3 additional white papers. If you go to the IOHK research site, I think our count of papers is up to 62. We're still, of course, chipping away at the peer review side of things. Some get in, some don't. And we're, of course, updating our papers and our content. And we're cleaning up a lot of the research, and we're kind of finalizing some research agreements, especially on the network side. We'd love to do some more in-depth knowledge about PubSub. We learned a huge amount about Poldercast because of the ITN, and I personally really like that protocol. And the creator of Poldercast, Spiros, for that 2012 paper, we're right now negotiating bringing him on board to do some directed research to kind of do Poldercast too, and combine lessons we've learned on the Haskell side and on the Rust side to get a PubSub system that makes sense for us. So that's real exciting. We'll announce that as soon as we can. We're still waiting for that post-quantum signature scheme for block signing. We thought we were going to get it at the end of January, but academics are academics, and this was a non-critical item, so we haven't pushed too hard on it. But one of these days we'll get it along with the associated code. So that's going to be a hash-based crypto scheme, and it's going to be used to sign blocks that stake pools make, and it'll add some degree of quantum resistance to our protocol. Unfortunately, until we have post-quantum VRF, we can't close that gap, and we'd also need to formally modify our security proofs to include quantum adversary. So there's quite a bit of work to do to achieve end-to-end post-quantum immunity. And there was also some open questions about certain things that we do with aggregate signatures like BLS, or things that you do as zero-knowledge crypto, if that's portable into the post-quantum world or not, and what changes you're going to make those things work well. So stick with it. We'll write some posts on that. It's not in the mission critical path because quantum computers don't exist at scale yet, but it is important to know that we have a path for quantum immunity if and when that becomes a problem, and that path is not disruptive to our core technology. Overall, things are really shaping up nicely, from Voltaire to our plans for Hydra to where we're at with smart contracts to how quickly we're rolling things out. So it's really been a blessing to see, despite that we have a global pandemic and the whole world is shut down, that we're moving just as quickly, if not faster, than we were prior to the world being shut down. I guess the lack of travel means people can be a little bit more focused on certain things, and I hope that holds up. Now, speaking about the global pandemic, you may have noticed I made some comments, speculations about what will happen in the United States. And this is a very complicated question. It's something that nobody really has a good answer about. The facts are that the United States basically was fairly aware of how serious COVID could be back in January and February. Apparently, the president and key members of our ruling class were given really comprehensive models and information that should certain thresholds occur, that COVID would become a global pandemic. And so there was many people who believed in January and February this would be the case. Now, unfortunately, what occurred is that the U.S. response was a bit lagged. While we did institute some travel bans, we didn't really push hard to get a coordinated response between the states and the federal government, coordinated testing, and a litany of other things. And it's not a particular criticism to any person. It's a reality that in a country of 300 million plus people that is run by a federal system with strong political differences and strong opinions, it's very difficult to get that initial coordination started. Since that time, we've seen a pretty remarkable mobilization of the American public. There's a lot of public-private partnerships that have been established. There's been a rampant scale-up in testing. It looks like antibody tests are on their way, so we'll actually be able to know who's been infected. And there's been now I think over 70 drugs identified that potentially could have therapeutic value, and there are literally hundreds of case studies running. Now, these case studies will finish their first wave of review in April. So these aren't vaccines, these are existing drugs, seeing if they have any therapeutic value. Now, those existing drugs, if they do, then what that means is you can take a critical case to a moderate case to a mild case, and substantially reduce the mortality rate amongst the most vulnerable, potentially. So that's a great win if we can achieve that. Now, some of you have noticed that I've been a little harsh about hydroxychloroquine, and I felt I should probably add a few words to that. Hydroxychloroquine is an old drug. I think it's been around for over 6 decades. And there was a French study where they used hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin, and I believe zinc together, for somewhere around 30, 40 patients. It's not a large enough group, and the study wasn't constructed in a way to give you statistically significant evidence that this is indeed a cure that somehow will completely solve the problem. And it's not exactly the safest of drugs to take. People with autoimmune problems like lupus take it. People who've been exposed to malaria have taken it, although malaria does exhibit a degree of resistance against chloroquine now. And I really hope that that drug works, but there needs to be more studies, and there are studies coming out, and as of April, we'll know. Now, those in the camp that hydroxychloroquine works, apparently doctors seem to agree with you, because I read an article yesterday that there's a shortage of hydroxychloroquine being created by doctors prescribing it to themselves, their family members, to stockpile, along with azithromycin. So maybe they know something we don't know, or maybe they're just stockpiling whatever they can get their hands on. There's also some other drugs like remdesivir and some other of those severe antiviral drugs, which are quite promising because they're designed specifically to work on viruses, and they tend to have very few side effects for people. The good news is that probably within the next 30 to 45 days, at least some of these are going to be determined to work pretty well. Now, should that occur, I do not believe that we will be in a mass quarantine situation, meaning the entire United States shuts down. Rather, I think what's going to happen is there'll be localized quarantines, and that'll be like New York City and other places. And those quarantine zones will stay in effect until there's some degree of herd immunity, and they've managed to flatten the curve enough, and their healthcare system is not super overwhelmed. The concern is that if you allow people to flee these large cities, I read statistics as of 1 out of every 1,000 people who are right now leaving New York City are infected, and they don't even know that they're infected with coronavirus. And if that's the case, then when people leave by the thousands or millions, you're actually creating a situation where that scattering further infects places which may not be able to handle the case load. So this is why I made the comment that I think that Trump may have no choice, but within the next week to 2 weeks, depending upon the growth rate, to institute some level of national quarantine. If he did that, probably would do it at the large city scale. So big cities like Los Angeles, New York City, and so forth say that people simply can't leave; they have to stay in place. There's already been substantial travel restrictions placed in many places within the United States, and that's probably going to continue for at least 2 to 4 weeks. That said, I do not believe that we will see a global scale quarantine throughout the entire United States uh, for 6 months or 9 months or 12 months. If there was anything that was across the whole US, it would probably be for a period of 4 to 6 weeks, maybe 8 weeks, just depending on how fast things go. But, we're seeing a doubling every 3 days to 4 days in major population centers for cases. My dad is a physician in Wyoming, and they went from no cases in Wyoming to around 40 cases in Wyoming. And Wyoming is the literal definition of social distancing. 500,000 people in a state the size of Colorado. There are ranches out there that are 600,000 acres. So you really can't get as far apart anywhere else in the world as Wyoming. And despite that, there are still some cases going on. So it's pretty amazing that even in some places sparse as Gillette and Cheyenne and Laramie, that they are seeing spreading occur. What's encouraging, though, is that the 80-15-5 rule of influenza seems to be the case with COVID. So 80% of people who get it are either asymptomatic or get mild cases. So it's just like a normal flu. 15% of people who get it either need to be hospitalized or get a moderate case, but it's not necessarily life-threatening. It's just something you remember and you tell your friends. You say, boy, that was tough. And 5% of people who get it get very, very sick and actually require rather significant treatment, including being sent to the ICU. Unfortunately, in countries like Italy, we've noticed that 90% of the people who've been put on, 91%, I think the statistic, or 81%, I'll have to look it up again. It came from UC Health, that were put on ventilators did not get off ventilators. They just simply died while on the ventilator. So that's quite unfortunate. And Italy in particular seems to have an unusually high mortality rate. The CFR is quite high amongst people who are ventilated, which is why we're seeing 700-800 people die per day in Italy. And it's just strange that they've been impacted so hard. So this is certainly a problem for the whole world. But I think the biggest lesson to learn here, there are three, and they're directly related to our industry. The first lesson is that the government is fully prepared, our government and all governments, to print an unlimited amount of money to maintain order. Right now, the United States is leading the pack, and it looks like our bailout is going to be about $6 trillion. $2 trillion from the bill directly, and Federal Reserve is prepared to inject $4 trillion into the U.S. economy. Many people ask, where does this money come from? And the answer is it's printed out of thin air. It's the world's largest pre-mine. And, when I was younger, I remember Bill Clinton leaving office, and the U.S. national debt was $4.5 trillion, and we had a surplus. Now, what we're doing in just a few days of debate is printing more money than every single U.S. president, from George Washington to Bill Clinton, spent in the entire history of the United States, including the Apollo program, including World War I and World War II, the Civil War, and so forth, which is extraordinary. And we're just doing it with a few days worth of debate. And of course, the liberal sides of our parties can't resist but try to riddle that bill with a bunch of identity politics and social justice and so forth, the standard disgusting stuff. But what can you do? This is who these people are. So it's indicated that the old order is fully prepared to do whatever is necessary, regardless if we suffer long-term consequences, to create an unlimited amount of money. And they'll just do that. They're also fully prepared to, of course, bail out industries which have behaved irresponsibly. Our company, we have a stockpile of cash for bad times. Microsoft did as well. It's one of the reasons Bill Gates is the world's richest man. He lived in an environment where people just simply didn't pay their obligations. So he made sure he had at least a year's worth of money on hand, assuming he made no revenue. Now, many of our businesses, for some reason, decided to spend their money on stock buybacks and other things, and they didn't stockpile resources. And as a consequence, now that times are thin, they're not in a position to survive for 3 or 4 months, which is really crazy. And yet we're now apparently going to bail these industries out. So it's really sad. There is no Main Street protection here. It's just always Wall Street. It's always corporatist, because that's who runs our government. And there is no difference in the EU or anywhere else for that matter. So that's the first lesson, that infinite money is coming. The second lesson is that the world is still very bad at coordinated global responses to collective problems. And despite it needing to work together, the world is not working together. The ventilator shortage problem is a great example of that. We knew as early as January that this is going to be a huge issue. Yet for some reason, we just simply couldn't collectively figure out how to rotate ventilators around the world so that the areas that need them the most could get them. So we don't have to panic manufacture haphazard, crude ventilators and get them to places. We could make sure that everybody who needed medical equipment could get medical equipment. That's just one example. Another example would be the personal protective equipment. Another example would be research coordination, drug trial coordination. There are 100 different ways that we could have worked together as a world to dramatically blunt this crisis. We didn't do it. I think this is the single greatest proof of why blockchain technology is necessary. The reality is that our industry is the industry about consensus, trust, and coordination. It's not about money. Bitcoin started as money, but this is all about saying people join a game and they all agree to play collective rules, and the governor of the game, the code, prevents people from cheating. And when you're talking about coordination, whether it be coordination of a supply chain, coordination of medical records, coordination of value, whatever it might be, trust, history, truth, these things, this is what we do. And this is where we excel. So this means, I think, we're going to see on the back end of this crisis a lot of people cleaning it up and asking, well, how can we do better? And this is a great opportunity for us as an industry to rise up and let the world know that our technology exists and that we have an alternative to creating a global government. We have an alternative to just empowering one particular body or entity or person. We can achieve what we want, which is global coordination, without pushing power to the center or embracing a king. So I do believe that this has exposed the world for its weaknesses, but then it also gives us a tremendous market opportunity on the back end. The third thing is, I think this is going to lead to a humongous amount of innovation. The innovation in particular about rapid testing, a lot of biomedical innovation. For example, there's probably going to be the case at some point where we can rapidly test people who enter a country. So instead of quarantine protocols being you can enter or you not enter, quarantine protocols will be that you fly in instead of to all airports, you fly into specialized airports and you get tested and you will not be admitted to the country unless your test results come back negative. I've already seen entrepreneurs and really smart people running around creating rapid test kits for corona, and they believe within 15 minutes you could potentially get a result. So I think there's going to be a tremendous amount of innovation over the next 10 to 15 years where people will be able to get tested at the border prior to entries for not just one disease, but potentially hundreds of diseases, which we are worried about spreading. This also opens up the question about digital identity and the idea of a biopassport. So there are some people who are thinking that it may be a good idea to embed within a passport circuitry that allows you to store a subset of attested medical records, from vaccination records to testing records and so forth. And to say, okay, well, before you can enter the country, you have to go get tested or verify that you're negative or vaccinated against these particular things. And then at the border, both before you arrive, when you're checking in, and when you arrive, you can actually scan the passport and it'll reveal that you're clear. So this type of stuff is coming. And it opens up a broader question about the portability of medical records, who owns those things, and identity in general. And this is basically why we are building the technology we're building. Again, we're not just talking about money, we're talking about identity. We're talking about who you are, what you've done, where you've gone. And that can be your education, your employment records, that can be your health, that can be your social network, these types of things. These are all relevant to nation states. These are all relevant to employers. And we have to either decide these things being owned by your government, by a meta government, or these things being owned by you, the consumer. And you get to decide where and when and how they're going to be used. So we are building a great piece of technology that's shipping with Cardano. It's called Prism, which uses the DID, the decentralized identifier, which is a standard created by the W3C, along with some great blockchain technology to actually allow you to have an identity and build lots of metadata information around that identity, specifically for these types of use cases. It'd be great for diaspora, it'd be great for vaccinations, it'd be great for medical records, it'd be great for basically any context where you need to own your identity, and then people need to operate on that identity in a global capacity while preserving your privacy and putting you in control. So I really hope the industry as a whole recognizes this is a great opportunity for us to have a meaningful statement on that innovation side and say, another thing, for example, some senators are complaining because Rand Paul tested positive, and others perhaps will have it, that they can't vote. Why can't senators vote remotely? Why do they actually need to be physically in Washington to do that, especially if they're ill? And then to extend that, why are we canceling elections? Why can't we vote online? So closely related to the identity component, still on the theme of innovation, I think this is a great opportunity for us to actually make some very compelling arguments about e-voting. I know Ed Felten and others have expressed deep concerns about the security of e-voting, but then when you think about the level of participation we can have, how far this field has advanced, the fact that we can create very secure environments, and the fact that we're trusting our phones with our location, our privacy, our money, and litany of other things, it probably makes a lot of sense to say that we can vote online. Now, the solutions we've constructed and are constructing can allow people to run elections at an incredibly low cost on any scale, from one person to a billion people, and spin up either direct democracy, liquid democracy, representative democracy. We can cover all these things. And this is what makes the Voltaire experiment so exciting. Yes, we're voting on changing the protocol and voting on ballots, but we just as well can use that to vote on leadership, and just as well could use that to vote on bills and corporate governance or government governments and so forth, society level governance. So this is a great opportunity for us to actually make big inroads in the digital identity and in the voting side in particular, and to propagate blockchain technology as far and wide as we can. On our side, we're of course going to try very hard to do that in the state of Wyoming. We think there's a great appetite for it. And on the back end of this, we'd love to see both the Democrat Republican primaries moving forward be done with online voting through blockchain. We'd also love to see statewide elections done that way. And it's such a small population state that we have a legitimate chance of being able to accomplish that within a 3 to 5 year time horizon. And as a U.S. state, that would be a wonderful way to create a beachhead where we can get it across the entire United States. We, of course, also try to sell these types of solutions in any government we enter, because we feel that it adds a lot of trust, credibility, faith, immutability, auditability into an election system. And of course, you can add layers of privacy to it to meet any domestic need that's required. So we're quite happy about that. So anyway, those are three things I think are going to come out of this, or have come out of this. One, government prints unlimited money, and the fiat system is corrupt, and we will see negative interest rates probably as a result of this. I do not have any faith in the global banking system. I think these guys are full of shit, and I think they're hurting the poorest people in the world, and we're on borrowed time with the way that the economy has been set up. I also believe that this has kind of exposed our global governance issues at a level that people just were not willing to admit, but now have to. And I think that this is going to lead to a huge amount of innovation, especially younger people who are deeply troubled and tired that our only solution for something that's affected humanity since the beginning is to shut the whole world down and just wait for a few scientists to come up with some stuff. So our response to this can be cynicism and pessimism, and we can respond by complaining and blaming and being toxic people that just negatively bring everybody down. Or we can respond in a very, very positive way by offering solutions and by offering a new way, new path forward, and saying that we can come together and work together and accomplish great things. And the people who offer solutions, generally the ones who get listened to, especially in times of a crisis. So another topic I'd like to bring up is the Wikipedia issue. I brought this up yesterday, and we mentioned people like David Gerard and others. Basically, here's the situation, as I stated. We have a situation where we feel we're a novel project. We feel we have a novel community. We feel we have novel accomplishments. We have been talked about by every single entity that matters at this point, from being on Bloomberg, from being in all of the major financial publications. We've been mentioned by governments. We've partnered with governments. We have won the academic space and achieved the highest levels of success there. Whether people like our project, agree with our values, disagree with our values, think we're going to succeed, not succeed, the fact that we've spent tens of millions of dollars, collectively built tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people in our community, and have been around for 5 years, I think this justifies us to have a Wikipedia page, especially given the standards that Wikipedia seems to have are completely bizarre. Some incredibly important people don't have pages. Very obscure people do in their stubs. There's a particular set of editors who seem to really think cryptocurrencies are a scam, have publicly said this. I even tweeted some statements from those editors, written books about it. And as a consequence, all cryptocurrency articles seem to receive arbitrary levels of scrutiny when these editors show up. And the first victim of note was Ethereum, where the article kept repeatedly being deleted. And the Ethereum community itself got so angry they started writing about that. This happened as early as 2016, 4 years ago. We are victims of this now, the Cardano community. Our article does not exist. It was erased. Now, if there were standards given to us, like these editors reached out and said, hey, it's obvious you guys are a notable project, but you need to write a great article. And then once you do that, we can actually get it done. We would be happy to invest enormous resources into doing that well. We'd work with the community, we'd work with trusted third parties, and we'd get this done so that we can have a fair and accurate representation of who we are, including criticisms. For example, our delays. Okay. Unfortunately, no such option is available to us. Basically, we're told we're violating Wikipedia's rules, or our community is. We're not sure how, but we are. And the consequences are that we don't even get to be talked about. This is a great example of why Wikipedia is a failed platform. You know, if you say you're just going to be in an encyclopedia and you're a centralized organization, you're allowed to write about any topic you want. You can leave out things, you can add things in, you can explain things in great detail or not a lot of detail. That's a commercial decision for the purchases of your good. Just like Britannica and Encarta and all these Comptons and all these other guys did. You can even hire Patrick Stewart to go ahead and read off your articles. I remember the old encyclopedia that did that. But if you say you're an open platform that's going to crowdsource contributions and your goal is to have an accurate, fair representation, a neutral representation, and balanced representation of things that are noteworthy, you must apply that standard across all articles in your ecosystem. And the fact that there is a known extreme bias against crypto, which is self-admitted, and Wikimedia allows these editors to still exist, and they're now using it against us, is a great example of a platform that has failed. There's been a very historic crypto bias in Wikipedia as early as 2010. I believe they were erasing the Bitcoin article and the Satoshi article, and Bitcoin itself was attacked by Wikimedia. They said it wasn't real money. They didn't want to accept it as a donation. They originally associated it with drug trafficking. You know, that's that organization. But I just want to remind every single person in our space, I do not feel Wikipedia is a credible resource. I feel it is a failed encyclopedia. There are some great articles there, and there's some great information there, especially in certain scientific topics. But for the use of cryptocurrencies, given that our competitors, some much smaller, are allowed to have pages, we are not. And any attempt we have to try to create a page or influence the creation of a page so people can talk about a noteworthy and notable project is completely met with censorship. I consider this commercial censorship. It's wrong. If they had the ethos that they're a commercial entity and they're allowed to talk about what they want to talk about and they're not fair and balanced, then that would be their prerogative and I'd be fine about it. But I feel that they're a dishonest organization as long as they allow this to persist. At some point, we will talk to members in the media about it. We will present an incredibly compelling case, and every month we will increase the level of pressure until we get a formal statement from the operators of Wikipedia why they want to allow these editors to continue behaving in this way, or why they feel we're not noteworthy. If they at least make an argument why our competitors are noteworthy, who are of the same or smaller size, who have been around for less time than us, or make an argument that somehow they are noteworthy, we're not noteworthy, then at least that's something. But right now, we're not following the rules. I guess they were. I guess Joe Lubin gets an article. I don't. This person gets an article. We don't. It doesn't make any sense. There's no rhyme or reason about it. We don't understand it. And if you're a critic of Cardano, a competitor of Cardano, and you're laughing and saying, hey, look how great it is, our competitor doesn't get mentioned. I will remind you, at one point we had an article. It was erased. You can become the victim just as easily as us, and you will unfortunately have the same recourse we have, which is to directly talk to the community and tell them what's going on. This has nothing to do with Cardano. This has nothing to do with your favorite or unfavored project getting some love or not getting some love. This is an industry-wide issue which has persisted for over 10 years with this particular platform. And the people in charge of deciding what's fair and balanced have written books saying we are scams as an industry, not Cardano, but as an industry, that the best thing that can be done is for us to go away as an industry. These are exact quotes if you take a look at my Twitter feed. So just because you happen to be on the beneficial end, do realize that at any moment you could be on the receiving end of this and you'll be in the same boat as us. So as an industry as a whole, I think we do need to band together and get a clear policy why crypto is treated the way it's treated. Perhaps this organization feels that they will actually be put out of business by our industry. There's actually a good possibility of that. I'd like to commend the Everpedia guys for trying. And at some point, if they keep doing this to us, maybe we will throw our hat in the ring and create a Wikipedia replacement. If you look at blockchain technology, with all due respect to Jimmy Wales, who I don't really think understands what we do, it was literally created to put the level of transparency, trust, accountability, and auditability that is required for a system like Wikipedia. You have edit logs. Shouldn't those be immutable? Shouldn't those be beyond censorship? You have incentives for contribution. Wouldn't a token economy help that and create a financial incentive for people to create high quality content? You have voting systems. Shouldn't you get some democratic mandate about certain things instead of allowing certain people to rule like little dictators and so forth? So to me, it feels very, very prudent for us to really explore having something like a Wikipedia replacement on a blockchain. And I'm glad that people are starting to look into it. And if this continues, I think there is no alternative for our industry as a whole. I don't want this distraction at the moment. We have too much work to do. And that's why I mentioned in my prior video that we're not going to do anything until after Shelley ships. And at that point, we'll have a bit more resources and a bit more oxygen to think. And I hope that this naturally resolves itself. Again, we're not asking for preferential treatment. We're not asking for anything above and beyond the standards that have already been set. We're just asking for fair treatment. And we don't feel it is fair treatment when people like David Gerard are editors deciding whether we're noteworthy or not when they have expressed a clear public bias over a multi-year period for multiple projects and said we don't even have a right to exist. This would be like having Nancy Pelosi be the editor of Trump's article on Wikipedia. I mean, or having Trump be the editor of Nancy's article. It's a clear public bias that is obviously there. It's not balanced. And if our competitors, some cases smaller and less relevant, are allowed to have pages and we're not, then you have to ask yourself, why is that? And if they don't feel we're a noteworthy project, then publicly open a letter and explain why we are. I'd also ask that anybody who donates to Wikipedia, prior to making a donation, ask for an explanation of why Wikimedia is willing to censor people and embrace this type of censorship. You know, why do you have a right to ask for money for a mission if you are clearly, in this case, in this industry, not following that mission? And we'll get around to it. Hold the patience and hold the faith about it. But it's disgusting and despicable to me. I think, the worst thing they did was editing Phil Wadler's biography. It is not their job to decide whether the work Phil does today is useful or not. If you say this man deserves to have a biography and he has chosen to spend his time on a project, then it is relevant to put that information in his biography if it's connected to the tone of the biography. He created Haskell, and that's noteworthy, but Plutus, that's not. That's IOHK spam. He created that language, amongst others. That is a real programming language. You can write code in. It is the primary smart contract language that thousands of dApps will be written in, probably by the end of this year. That thousands of developers will be trained. Blockchain courses will be taught in this programming language. Somehow we don't deserve to have a page about that language, even though very small, obscure programming languages are allowed to have a page. And the creator of that language, who does deserve to have a page and has one, if it's put in that he created that language, it's removed. And the exact editorial comment was IOHK blockchain spam. That was outrageous. It's wrong. And it's just an example of where Wikipedia is failing. I'd love to see a formal response to this. I really would love to. Explain to me how that's spam. We could, of course, change and edit things, but that's a fact. That language exists. It's a piece of academic work. It's the single most sophisticated, elegant, and formally verified with formal semantics programming language for cryptocurrencies ever created. A whole new counting model, extended UTXO, was created to accommodate it. It is not a small piece of work. It is a collective piece of work of over 3 years of intense research by a team of brilliant academics that has been written in a rigorous format. It exists. It's been coded up. You can write Plutus smart contracts. So while other programming languages, incredibly small academic languages, apparently deserve to have a Wikipedia page, we don't deserve to have one there. And the creator of that language, who does have a page, we're not even allowed to mention that he worked on that in his page. This is an example of censorship, plain and simple. So that's the Wikipedia thing. Now, some people have pointed out that we do have articles in other languages: Russian, German, I think Croatian, Japanese. And that's another example of the irregularity of the platform. Apparently, we're noteworthy and notable in other societies, and those editors are great. And we have, in some cases, great articles, or at least mention, but then in English, we're not noteworthy. Okay, so what's the standard there? It's a pretty crazy thing. And when these things are pointed out, I understand it's a decentralized organization. I understand these are volunteer contributors. But when they are pointed out, the people who coordinate, run that organization have a moral obligation, if not fiduciary, to step up and investigate. And this is of that scale, considering that's been going on now for years. It's been going on now in multiple communities. It has to stop. All right, now let's get to your questions. Love to hear your thoughts about the whole Steem versus Tron saga. Yeah, that's a great example of social consensus versus computer-based consensus. So we spent all this time constructing consensus protocols, whether proof of work or proof of stake or otherwise. And the idea is that you have this notion of an honest majority, and then they get corrupted. A 51% attack happens, or you have a takeover like what occurred with Steem. And then suddenly you say, oh, God, the chain is completely taken over. And then people rise up and they say, well, we really didn't agree with that. We saw this also with Ethereum Classic, for example, or Bitcoin Cash. So your protocol allows the user of the system under normal operations to have a reasonable expectation of the truth that they're seeing is right. But then what happens is that when people attack the system, either they conduct a 51% attack or what happened with Steem, there are people who will say, okay, well, I guess I just have to go along with that. But then usually what happens is the majority of the community or some clique of the community will say, I don't like that. That's wrong. I don't agree with this. And they split off. Now, proof of stake is particularly powerful to this because let's use a thought experiment. Let's say that you have 10,000 tokens and 5,000 are owned by one person and the other 5,000 are owned by 5,000 individuals. Now, under this scenario, from a network view, you would have equal power on both sides. But from a person view, you have 1 to 5,000. So let's say that person with 5,000 buys one of these things. This person leaves. There's 4,999 here, and there's one here. And then says, I'm going to be king of the network. I have 51% of the supply. I'm going to conduct a 51% of attack. Now, from a network view, he's allowed to do that. But from a people level view, what happens if those 4,999 people just simply say, we are now going to create token 2, and we're all going to have the same amount, but you have nothing. So he's left over in token 1 with his ownership of 51%. He can do whatever he wants, but then everybody's in token 2. Now, you have to ask yourself, does token 1 still have the same amount of value? The answer is no, because the value comes not from the token, but from the people behind the token. Those people, their social consensus, the infrastructure that they bring, the transactions that they conduct, the thoughts that they have, the interactions that they have with each other. Value is always in these systems connected to the users. This is why when you see guys like Peter Schiff or Rubini or these others babble on about how cryptocurrencies are worthless, because you can click a button and fork it and then suddenly create 21 million more with a different token. You say, yes, you can do that, but that next token doesn't have the people. People live in an ecosystem. So proof of stake is the ultimate system in that respect, where when we are all following the social contract, and by the way, the wealthy have the highest incentive to follow the social contract, because if they behave badly, they're the ones that could be removed from the system fastest. When you're following that, generally speaking, these systems become very resilient and capable of resolving their problems quite quickly. Now, we are investigating alternatives to stake weighting for control of a system. Now, Bitcoin has that. They have an exogenous system that's mining. But proof of merit, there's got to be different ways of doing this. We've also seen protocols created that actually allow people to prove they're human beings. It's called proof of human. And it could be everything from solving a CAPTCHA puzzle to something else. And then you can register for a period of time and identity and then actually verify you're a real unique person. So this is the next generation after the first generation of proof of stake. But in the meantime, it means that we can intervene as a community to recover from events that we feel violate the social contracts of our systems. Now, it remains to be seen as these systems scale, can an intervention actually occur at a scale of millions or billions of users? But then again, if you're in millions and billions of users, no one actor will have so much stake that they can control the system. The Gini coefficient should distribute in a way where wealth is fairly well distributed. And you can do all kinds of things to kind of create checks and balances inside the system. So I think people tend to get too caught up in the network scale side of things. And they say, if that doesn't give me the absolute guarantee and principle and promise, and the code itself is not perfect, then somehow the system can never recover from an attack. These are systems that are still young and fragile, and ultimately their value comes from us, so we the people can rise up. The point is that the systems protect us from ourselves. They show us when fraud has occurred. They show us when people are lying. They show us when the rules are being violated. Right now, these $4 trillion that are being printed with the Federal Reserve, nothing is going to be done transparently. They're not even subject to a GAO audit. Nobody can audit them. So they can just pay anybody they want, do whatever they want. There's not really going to be a lot of checks and balances or controls there. And we just have to trust people are honest. With our system, we don't trust anyone. We can see everybody's sins as they are. And then we as a collective ecosystem have the ability to intervene where and when necessary to protect the integrity of the system. And as the systems get larger and larger, the rules of those systems start looking like stone. And people just tend to follow them because they know that they can't violate them. It's almost like a digital panopticon in that sense. Charles, how are we different compared to Tezos? So there are surface level similarities between the Tezos project and Cardano project, but under the hood, they're completely different projects because they have completely different foundations for their technology. We do not have the same consensus algorithms. So our security models are different. The way our algorithms work are different. How people delegate are different. How people stake are different. How stake pools operate are different. Our protocols were built over a multi-year period with lots of peer review. They provide things like a decoupled clock with Chronos, eventually recovery from dishonest majority. We do not require a checkpoint, these types of things. So the consensus layers are completely different. The network layers are completely different. We built something from scratch. I think they may be using Secure Kademlia or something like that, but they're using much more standard things, nothing significant there. We have a completely different network stack based on principles like RENA. And has the ability to dynamically adjust its peer-to-peer policy. We're going to have best-in-class PubSub whenever we get that. And our performance and resilience in that network stack is very, very good. And we thought about it for over 3 years and wrote a 106-page paper on how to do that. Third, our accounting models are completely different. So Tezos uses an Ethereum-style account model. We use something called the extended UTXO model. We wrote a paper about this in January, and this model is great because it enables us to use Hydra. You cannot use Hydra in its current form in Tezos. Second, this model is much more amenable to sharding. World state is much harder to shard, and extended UTXO is much better for a functional design model. And it also gives us a superior way of handling multi-asset to the way that they handle multi-asset. Our governance systems are totally different as well. When we launch the Voltaire testnet, you guys will see that, but we have a different way of voting and a different way of handling democracy. They've chosen a much more deep on-chain system. We've chosen a system that starts a little bit off-chain, but with something in a side chain, which we can gradually bring in. So it's a slightly more conservative way of handling governance. But overall, I think it's a nice way of doing it because it allows us to make rapid changes to that governance system. We're both implemented in functional languages. We use more formal methods than they do, but they use OCaml, and there is some Coq that they use in their stack. We'll give them that. But there are surface level similarities, but they're completely different design, science, and philosophy, these projects. They were primarily launched as a governance experiment. So they are a proof of stake coin. They do smart contracts, but the real USP of Tezos is governance on chain. This is what they were all about from the L.M. Goodman days. Very worthwhile experiment to conduct, and I think they've actually made some meaningful and significant contributions. We were launched as what we termed a third generation cryptocurrency. So we deeply wanted to understand interoperability, we deeply wanted to understand scalability, and we deeply wanted to understand governance. And we've made, in our view, meaningful contributions in all of these categories. And we have answers and solutions to all of these categories, whereas they've been primarily pushing governance. Now, they've been able to get to market a little faster than us because we had some delays mentioned before. But, this is how it is. And if I had a do-over, I would have been to market before them. And if they had a do-over, they would have been to market really quickly too, because they would have made many different decisions about their governance and about the people that they worked with and so forth. And these things happen, and no one will remember them in 5 years or 6 years after we've shipped everything in our stacks. But I think ultimately the process that we've chosen, the way we approach how we write code, the way how we work with academic partners, all of these things are definitely very different from how Tezos works. And the fact that we now have 62 papers we've published. I don't recall a single major scientific paper that they've published and pushed through peer review. I guess they don't feel that's necessary. And we get criticized a lot in the space that that's not necessary. But I feel that foundations built on academic rigor are much, much, much more meaningful than foundations built by engineers. And we try it until it doesn't work, especially when you're talking about people's privacy and money and people's identity. From Joni Sarker, can you talk about if Cardano is working on interoperability? We are. We've written a lot of protocols, both on the proof of work side of the world and the proof of stake side of the world, and we're aware of the market standards that exist. So really, to be convenient, to look and say, well, you have side chains, and there's lots of things you can do there. So NEPA POWs are a great example of this. Dionysios Zindros has really been the brainchild of that. He built his whole PhD on this. And basically the idea is that there's a certain structural property of proof of work that you can take advantage of, that if you know a little bit about how that chain works and a little bit about the initial distribution, then you can construct very, very small proofs that allow you to verify a transaction that you're getting is real, meaning the tokens exist and they haven't been double spent. Those are the two conditions that you need to satisfy. So the NEPA POW idea, the non-interactive proofs of proof of work, are those proofs. And we created the theoretical foundations for them, and others have borrowed it, like FlyClient, for example. And that science is maturing quite rapidly. And that's the key to having super light clients for Bitcoin. And that's the key to having beautiful interoperability between two proof of work cryptocurrencies, because they can trustlessly send transactions to each other if you inject just a little bit of bootstrap information in both chains. And you change a little bit of the validation so that these transactions can validate and treat assets as foreign assets. So we understand a huge amount about NEPA POWs. We've even constructed a proof of burn system for that. And at some point, we will roll that out. And because we can interpret those proofs, our stake pools could process those proofs. And then that would allow us to receive assets and information from a proof of work chain. Now, for a proof of work chain to get those assets back or interact with us, that chain would need to have some changes. And that's really one of the problems of proof of sidechains, is that Bitcoin is king, and the people who maintain Bitcoin have really no desire to talk to other cryptocurrencies. So they are holding back the entire industry-wide decentralized trustless interoperability conversation by not leading there. So there's also an equivalent notion of constructing these types of proofs using different math and different ideas for proof of stake, but that's one level of it. The other level is saying, well, because Bitcoin won't change and because the industry is where it's at, let's create trusted bridges that can see both systems and kind of manage locks. So Interledger is an example of a protocol like that, or you could use the Lightning Network as a protocol like that. There's been a lot of ideas about trusted third parties coming in to manage movement of funds and information between systems. So we're pragmatists. We're not going to go invent the Wi-Fi. We've already done a lot of that. But at the end of the day, interoperability is a market standard. And whether we have a perfect idea or a substandard idea, the market's going to tell us which one to work with. And that's the one that we're going to adopt and pull in. So we're waiting kind of to see what happens, and we'll see what we can do. Now, that's for everything outside of Cardano. But there's this idea, it was as early as 2016, where we were talking about Cardano SL and CL and Cardano AD. And basically the concept there was that we'd have these side chains that would run connected somehow to Cardano, and they could do their own things. They could have their own consensus rules, or they could have their own virtual machines, which were distinctly different. They would run for some reason. One thing we can do, because the way we wrote the Byron reboot code and the Shelley code and the Goguen code, is that it's very easy for us to spin up a permissioned ledger on that code base and switch from Ouroboros to OBFT, which is a BFT protocol that's basically like what Fabric has or any of these other consortium chains have. And if we have a good sidechains communication protocol, when you spin up that permission ledger, it will be able to natively communicate with Cardano as an interoperability layer. It's almost like what Polkadot or Cosmos are doing. So we can capture that business model very quickly and allow people to do permissioned DLT with Cardano technology, issue assets, run smart contracts, do it very high performant in any configuration they want. But then when they need a public system to communicate to other permission blockchains or to allow their users to use public infrastructure, they can move assets and information very easily between those two systems. So we are investigating that. And a lot of this came out of our discussions with Atala. Atala really gave us a nice sandbox to explore and understand these things. And to me, it'd be great to just capture what Cosmos has done and Polkadot have done. And that's a very low cost thing for us to do. And this code base is written in a way that makes it quite easy for us to do that. It would be like literally weeks to months worth of additional engineering work to bring that to our ecosystem. And then suddenly we have the perfect permissioned and permissionless ledger solution for everybody. So this is what good engineering gives you. And it's one of the examples of why we wrote things in the way that we wrote things, is to be able to bring these things out quite well for everybody. Will Daedalus have Ledger Nano OS support soon? Yeah, we do have that support in the code, but we haven't turned it on yet. And we will turn it on in the coming weeks or months. It's hard to say exactly when that's going to hit. And this is why actually the Daedalus Canary idea is so powerful, because we could actually turn it on with that. And then you guys could play around with it. We verify that things are looking pretty good. But there's a lot we actually have to do on the accounting model for Daedalus, because right now it's just HD wallet, you import the wallet, and that's it. But then you have single use addresses, you have cold wallet support, you have multi-currency because that's coming soon. So these types of things are coming, and it'd be nice to be able to do that in an interface, and you guys can play around with it for a while. But we've known about it, we have plans for it. It's not super hard to do. And there's a question about attrition of IOHK employees. We don't really have that much attrition of IOHK employees. We have a very low turnover rate. I think it's 5 or 6% per annum, maybe lower. There has been some turnover in the product management side. Guys, we've had 2 years of delays. Figure that one out. If we try to get something out and it doesn't get out, some people have to be accountable for that, and we just change directions. So I won't hesitate to change directions where and when it's necessary, because I'm accountable to delivering a product, and I'm accountable to you as a community. And no matter how well-intentioned, people are accountable to deadlines. And if they're not achieved, then we pivot and change strategy, change processes, in some cases, change personnel. That said, very few people leave. They like what they do. And in many cases, people try to poach our people from Google to Apple to others, and they stay even when offered more money because they like what we do. Can you talk a little bit about what happened with runtime verification? Do you think it would ever contract them out again? RV is another example of where we really wanted something to work. We just couldn't financially get it to work. So when we started this, we didn't know if the extended UTXO or Plutus idea would ever materialize in time to be competitive and produce real value for the market. So we actually launched two teams at the same time. And one was go formalize what Ethereum had done and basically do a do-over. So had I still been CEO of Ethereum and had I still been in that ecosystem, Ethereum would not be running on the EVM. It'd be running on Yella, what Grigori Roshu created. Yellow is a beautiful virtual machine. It's significantly better than the EVM. It's based on some legacy principles from LLVM. It's a lot easier to write tooling for it, and you could do tons more things with it. And the assembly even looks a lot prettier. It looks like C as opposed to like assembly. So overall, what we did with RV was something more traditional and expected in the imperative world. And then we also had this concept of K and SBC as a long-term path to having thousands of programming languages run in the system. Extended UTXO in Plutus is much more of a DSL-driven approach, where you have like kind of this Plutus idea, which is your interoperability language, and it allows you to corral off-chain infrastructure. But then within it is this magical concept that you can write DSLs for law, for supply chain, for medical records, and financial transactions. And those are very simple, and they're very easy to test and validate against the business logic. So while you get less flexibility in that model, you get a much higher assurance that what you're writing is right. And what you're writing is specific for your domain. And also, you move away from professional programmers, which is what Yellow is looking at, more towards domain experts. And the domain experts could be lawyer, could be supply chain expert, MBA, are actually writing their own smart contracts on a kind of a plug and play language to model their business domain. Now, all things, if we had unlimited resources, we'd still be funding the RV relationship. We spent about $5 million doing foundational work, a few million in fiat, a few million in ADA. But it was just one of those things where we had to make some hard choices, and we scaled down certain things to make sure that we could deliver an end-to-end full product. Because, markets went from $30 billion ADA down to $1 billion ADA, and you can't spend a $30 billion ecosystem for a $1 billion product. But that said, we've maintained a good relationship with Grigori and his people. I think he's a very ethical guy. I love the way he thinks. I love his researchers. And I think there's a very strong possibility that when we reintroduce Voltaire, that we probably could find a way to bring him back into the community somehow, and perhaps a slightly smaller, longer-term engagement to find a way to get Yella into Cardano and find a way to get K and SBC where it needs to go to realize that promise. And so that's going to take some time, and we still have to herd some cats for it. But he's been doing this for 15 years. After he left NASA and became a scientist at UIUC, this is his baby, and he's created his own logic. It's called reachability logic, and he keeps working on the K framework, and he keeps doing work with SBC. His graduate students do as well. So that was another reason we invested in him, is that regardless we gave him money or not, those projects would continue. And there's even been some people in cryptocurrency space who have looked into his technology, like Elrond, I believe, is using Yella written in Go. So that's some very impressive work. We even got it working at one time in 2018. We had a Yella testnet, and we ran some Yella contracts. I know Sebastian was very excited about a prospect of some syntactic sugar for Yella, so people could write smart contracts directly in it. And I was really happy to see that. And they wrote some great papers, and they actually wrote great code. So we're real sad to see that go, but we'd love to bring it back in at some point. Charles Hoskinson looks like he's 60 years old. Yeah, I'm getting old, guys. Old and fat. White hair is percolating in. It's for you. I looked young when I started this. Now I look old. Justin Fujimoto asks, what types of trusted hardware is being built at the Wyoming Blockchain Lab? What use will they provide? Basically, the idea, after we did the New Balance deal, we used the Tangem cards as the authentication piece. It's nice when you have trusted hardware because you have on one hand the token, one hand the trusted hardware, and one hand the product. So you kind of have to merge these three things together. So if you can take something and embed it into the product itself, for example, you have a handbag, you put a chip into the handbag or a chip into the shoe, then you can do that in the supply chain, and then you have a separate role in your supply chain called the authenticator, and the authenticator can verify what they're seeing is real, and then they have an authentication token that they can send to be controlled by that piece of trusted hardware that you embed within the device. Then what happens is that everything moving forward is challenge response. The consumer will have an app, and what that consumer is going to do is when they see the product, it could be a handbag or a shoe or a watch, they can scan it, usually using NFC, and it's a challenge response protocol. The app knows the blockchain with the authentication token on it. It's saying that the chip is identifying that it is this particular token. Then you say, okay, prove that you have the credentials for that. And then the chip will generate a signature from a challenge and then send it to the phone that's asking. Only the entity that has that private key will be able to do that. Now, if you generate the trusted hardware in the right way, what you can do is guarantee that those keys are unique. So when an address is generated in this enclave, it doesn't exist anywhere else. You get a proof of uniqueness for that. And you know that those authentication tokens were issued by the authenticator, either by the merchant themselves or a third-party provider for that merchant. And then once you validate that that particular address is right, that address can be attached to an arbitrarily large amount of metadata. This is why Cardano has an identity standard with the DID, and Cardano has a metadata standard. Because when you tether these things together, then you can actually go off chain and grab a huge amount of information that is connected to a hash that's on chain. And that huge amount of information can be everything from the factory it was made by, the engineers who worked on it, the third-party auditors who were involved, how long it sat in a storage container, how long did it take to go from the factory to the retail store, the original price that it was sold at, if it's something that's maintainable like a watch, the service record, who serviced it, all that entire history could be there. And you can even do something where that history is actually only provided to the owner. So, for example, you can register your identity, connect it to the product at the point of purchase, and then your identity gets signed, and only you can release that to somebody else. So, as part of your transaction, when you resell goods, you do that. But then you are entitled to all that information, but no one else can see that. So, what we'd like to do is take from a Tangem card and build a trusted hardware module that is implantable in shoes, watches, and other such things, and has strong security guarantees. It's tamper resistant. It's super cheap to manufacture. It can be put in a bioavailable casing, so you can embed it in animals for farm track and trace, and that it doesn't require external power. So there's a lot of work that has to be done for what type of antenna is needed, how much local processing power is needed. Can we use functional hardware design to use formal methods to get strong guarantees that the security properties we care about are there, like you can't extract the private key from the system. And we may even have the opportunity to add some more capabilities to this chip above and beyond just being a trusted enclave that's embeddable. For example, we wrote a paper called One-Shot Signatures, which uses quantum cryptography to create signatures that could only be used once and never reused once they're used. there may be a possibility that on a standard piece of silicon, we could actually emulate this protocol. We don't quite fully know yet, but there may be that possibility. Now, where this is very useful is then that chip can be put into a USB stick or some other equivalent device, and it can be an augmenter to stake pools. And when they sign a block, they sign with a signature that can never actually be reused. So it's not even a question of did they erase their key or not, or did the trusted hardware enforce it. By the laws of physics, you can never reuse that signature. And if you're curious about that paper, it's one of our 62 papers we published. Just Google one-shot signatures, Aggelos Kiasis, our chief scientist, and you can see that come up. It's a great piece of work. It came out this year, and it's another example of the original science that we do at IOHK, which is incredibly vast, and apparently our competitors don't seem to care about. Johnny Walker Blue Label, Mac. It's a dry year. So for those who don't know, I do a wet year and a dry year. I've been doing this for a long time. So I'll spend a whole year and I can drink. The next year I don't drink. And then the year after I drink and so forth. So 2020 is a dry year. I picked a hell of a dry year. We have a global pandemic and I'm just at home. I'm like, man, be nice to drink some whiskey. I like Japanese whiskey and Scottish whiskey. Really, really, really love Hibiki. It's great stuff. And on the Scottish side, Glenmorangie Signet is really good. Macallan 30 is very good too. And also, I really like Jameson 18. That's some good stuff. It's not that expensive, the Jameson stuff, like $100 a bottle or something like that. I was, wow, that's expensive. It's like Macallan 30 is like $5 a bottle. So you can spend a lot of money on whiskey. So there's some great whiskeys out here that aren't too expensive. And next year, I'll tell you all about them. But this year, I'm completely dry since December 26th. Charles, why did you name your project after Cardano? Is he related to you, or what is your connection? I have some Medici blood in the family. I don't think there's any Cardano blood. Cardano was the ultimate Renaissance guy. He was a doctor, a lawyer, he was a mathematician, he was a gambler, a complete scoundrel. He was the personal physician of the Pope, but then excommunicated, but still hung out with the Pope even after being excommunicated. He was just one of those guys that lived a life that was unbelievably rich, wasn't nice, wasn't evil. He was somewhere in between. He was basically built out modern probability theory because he wanted to be a better gambler. He also inadvertently created the Italian peer review process because at the time he was around, most of the scientists in Italy would guard their knowledge and not publish anything because it was a way to maintain employment. So how you would get a professorship in an Italian university is you'd go and present to the students, and if they felt you were knowledgeable, they'd say, yes, this person should be part of our system. So people didn't want to publish anything because it would ruin their brand. They kept things secret. So what Cardano would do would get people very drunk and learn all of their secrets, and he wrote them all down, and then he eventually started publishing books about this, which was super taboo at the time, and including how to factor quartic polynomial, excuse me. So he got that from Tartaglia, which means the stutterer. So he was a really legendary guy, and I think he was even a contemporary of Da Vinci. And I figured it'd be a perfect name for a cryptocurrency because the cryptocurrency is not good or bad. It's a neutral thing. It's brilliant and inspired. It's a bit of a polymath. And everybody has an opinion about it, and you'll never get a clear, concise way but it certainly has a huge impact, and it's a man of its time. I just really like Cardano, and I wanted to have a gender balance in it, so I was either going to name Ada or Grace. Grace for Grace Hopper, the creator of COBOL, wonderful woman. Admiral Grace was in the Navy, and she was one of the first female programmers. Brilliant gal. I think she was the discoverer of the computer bug because she found a moth in a computer and called it a bug. And she just had this indomitable personality for being a small gal. She even carried these things called nanosticks, which is the speed of light in a nanosecond, and she'd hand them out to people and say, "This is why your computers aren't faster." And of course, Ada Lovelace was the first programmer, female programmer, and she was actually the daughter of Lord Byron, who was one of my favorite poets. And Ada was just a little easier to translate, pronounce, because of the Ada programming language. Are those pictures behind you related to Cardano by any chance? No, that's a Gustav Klimt, and that's a Waterhouse painting, both from long ago. Charles, please talk about spiral dynamics theory implemented in Cardano. Example, Africa. Actually, we have some people who are in the spiral dynamics community working for me. My secretary actually used to be the secretary for a very prominent person in the spiral dynamics community, Ken Wilber. And there's a lot of great ideas from that community I think we can apply. But I'm not a spiral dynamics expert. I am reading about them, but it'll take me months to talk about it in an informed way. So I'll pass on that for now, but we'll get back to it. You previously mentioned Algorand as a cryptocurrency project could potentially compete with Cardano. What other cryptocurrency projects out there you see as potential competitors? So I think you have to have a test. The first test does the brain of the cryptocurrency, so the science behind it, the protocol design, does that have a decentralized, faceless, replenishing source? Because the reality is the challenges we're going to face in 2050 and 2100 are totally different than the challenges we face today. So do you have a mind, a collective, global, decentralized mind that's capable of thinking around these problems and doing so in a way that's resilient and not able to be co-opted by the whims and will of the day-to-day? So one of the reasons we've embedded ourselves into the academy and made a conscious choice to decentralize that, so Tokyo Tech and Athens and Edinburgh and Wyoming, all across the whole world, and eventually many more, is that that's faceless. I could die, our chief scientist could die, other people could disappear, but the research goes on, and that research doesn't have a particular ethnicity, gender, or anything about it. It's global in nature. So the first criteria is the brain that designs the protocols to get you to the next generation to resolve the problems of your generation. So that's one pillar. If you don't have a decentralized brain, you're dead. The second thing is engineering. Is the engineering diverse, and is the engineering done in a way that's sustainable, meaning that there's money and there's opportunity for diversity? We have yet to achieve this at the Cardano side, but post-Voltaire, that is going to be the major pillar, and I think this one of the strongest USPs that we have. So basically, this idea is if you want to write code and you're good, you can be discovered and you can have that opportunity and you can make your livelihood working for the blockchain itself. Dash has achieved this in some respect. Zcash has also achieved this in some respect. And at the end of this year, we will achieve this as well. It's going to get done. I made sure of it. So basically, that is the second pillar, and every cryptocurrency has to have that. Ethereum will not. Vitalik, for whatever bizarre reasons, walked away from it. And so I think Ethereum will die because of that one decision. Any cryptocurrency that does not have this will either be relegated to being a single-use cryptocurrency like Bitcoin as a store of value, or it will die out because it just can't compete. If a cryptocurrency can mint its own money and invest that money into its own development, it's a positive feedback loop, and over a long arc, that cryptocurrency will have so much more resilience and power and diversity than a cryptocurrency funded through voluntarism, benefactors, or other methods and methodology. Will never be co-optable. Okay, the third condition is the actual dynamics, the social dynamics of the community itself. So it's entirely possible you can have a decentralized brain, and very possible you can have decentralized funding, but then you can have a very toxic community that is very group-thinky, cult of personalities, a litany of social problems that prevent it from growing to the next level. So just because your religion may be the one true religion and have the key to world peace and making society great and so forth, if you only have 500 members, and because you guys are presented in such a crazy way that you can never get more than 500 members, you can't get to 1 billion. So you need an open community, inclusive community, a community that has a high degree of what's called idea flow. You have a community that needs to reward merit, the community that brings people up and allows people to grow and allows people to actually voice their opinions without fear of retribution or reprisal. You need an opinion that can deal effectively with crises and controversy. So a crisis occurs, a key member dies, imprisoned, some event comes in, and you're able to overcome that. It's a nothing burger. Like, for example, the Cardano Foundation failure. We overcame that, not an issue. We moved right on, didn't destroy our ecosystem. The Mt. Gox failure with Bitcoin, that's an example. But you also need community that's willing to admit it's wrong and willing to pivot when new ideas come. So this is the failure of Bitcoin. It's incapable of pivoting. It's incapable of addressing new ideas. It's very insular in that respect. And you need a community that's capable of working with others when that makes sense. The reality is that someday, some point, we'll probably work with the Ethereum community. At some point, we'll probably work with the EOS or Tezos community if it benefits us both mutually. And we'll do so in a way where it's not like North Korea talking to South Korea. It'll do so in a way just like Germany talking to France. At one time rivals, at one time they had some hostilities. Now no one seems to care, and we can work together. So you need those three properties. You need positive social dynamics that allow you to have high idea flow and inclusivity and the ability to grow, and it empowers people to come up from the nothingness and rewards them accordingly. You need to have a really strong funding mechanism that's decentralized and utilize the power of the printing press to get people where they need to go. And you need to have a decentralized brain. So any cryptocurrency that has all three of those is going to be around in 50 years or 100 years. Doesn't need me. Now, Algorand doesn't have that. Tezos doesn't have that, although they're getting closer to it. And at the moment, we don't have that. No one has that completely. And we're working on it. We think a lot about it. It's why we look at things like Voltaire. It's why we look at things like governance. It's why we invested 3 years of time into voting systems. This is the true power and long-term maintenance and viability of a cryptocurrency. And we're super, super important to that. Okay. All right, one more good question. Maybe two. Did you choose a virtual conference solution for the Shelley release? I had a meeting this week and last week about it. We've been talking about it every week. We have definitely invested a lot of time into looking for a good solution. We found some, and we're in the final stages of building our way up to getting to a point where we actually have one. So we'll probably make an announcement in a week or two about what vendor we're going to go with. I think Hubs from Mozilla is pretty interesting. But would be nice to have a VR component, make sure there's a lot of interactivity. We'd like to be able to do something over a multi-day. It'd be super cool to do a hackathon at the same time as well. So we're trying to do something where we can innovate a little bit. And we're also trying to do something where we could actually have 50 or 100,000 people if we wanted to. everybody's at home right now. It's a perfect time to do a virtual conference. You'll get a lot of attendance, and there's just a lot of content that we have to release. And so I think we're talking more like 30 or 40 presentations between everybody. So there's a lot to talk about. And there's also a media component. We'd like to invite journalists so that they can write lots of great articles about it. So we'll talk about it. Is Plutus Fest still a thing? Yeah, actually, if we can do a successful hackathon for our virtual conference, what we'll probably do is run 2 virtual conferences per year, a general Cardano conference, and then run a governance conference specifically for these things. But then we could also add a third one that is multiple conferences like Plutus Fest, and run it quarterly and just rotate it from place to place, because it's super cheap to do a virtual conference and it's quite easy to do that. And thank you, Bob. Bob, and actually, you ain't seen nothing yet. The documentation is completely being rewritten for Cardano. So Cardano.org will possess that documentation, and by June we should have really amazing kind of documentation. We're working real hard to rewrite that. How can we give lifelong learners accredited and the privileges that should come with that without being tied to name brand universities? I think Coursera, Udemy, Udacity, the edX, these types of platforms are the very first step. The idea of global credentials, and you have to separate knowledge from vocation. So we used to do this, and then it got all screwed up in the 19th century. It used to be that the people who went to the academy were the wealthy, and they didn't really have to work. So they weren't going to the academy for get a job in some civil service. They were going to the academy because, well, they want to learn about rhetoric or logic or physics or something. And usually they came from large noble families. And so as a consequence, somebody went in the military, somebody went to the clergy, one person was going to run the family. So what the hell do you do with the seventh son or something like that? Well, you throw him into the university because you have no other place to put him. So it's a convenient place to put him. And then he does something that creates prestige. Great. Then somewhere along the way, we had this British Empire, and we said, oh, well, the civil service needs credentialing. So how do we know someone's qualified to be a bureaucrat in this gigantic global bureaucracy that runs a third of the world? Well, we'll give them a college degree, and then that's a stamp that they're capable of doing something. And so this idea of education as a vocational thing went from I'm going to train you on the job, or there's a trade school, to we're actually going to combine the same thing that nobles go to with the everyday people go to. And there was a big shift in the 19th and 20th century towards that end. Well, now employers are saying, well, this makes no bloody sense at all. Why the hell do I want to say that just because you went to Williams College and got a degree in gender studies, you're somehow more qualified to be an entry-level employee in my company than somebody who had 6 months of intensive vocational training specifically related to the things that I do as an employer? Also, what happens when I have to retrain you? Do I have to send you for another 4-year degree? Or would I send you to a 3-month retraining program? So why don't we do the latter instead of the former? Because it's cheaper and faster for all parties involved. And people change vocations so much anyway, there's no thing there. So the counter argument is, well, it teaches you how to think. And I disagree with that entirely. There's not enough philosophy or critical thinking or mathematics education in modern university pedagogy to particularly do that, or it proves that somebody's disciplined. It doesn't prove anybody's disciplined at all. I'm sorry, if people drink their way for 4 years and be a C- student and get through, there's nothing, or it grows a person up. It's like, come on, guys, let's be real here. So I think modern pedagogy has changed. Modern education has changed to a point where university degrees are irrelevant and they're unnecessary if your goal is to get a job. And vocational training is now pivoting more towards topical and nano degrees, like what Udacity is pushing, and what Coursera is pushing, and a lot more is going into the cloud and going online. And there's a lot of accelerated programs. My own brother, for example, he graduated from Metro State in psychology and decided he wanted to be a nurse. And so he went to a BSRN program that was 1 year at Regis, a very accelerated program, and got a bachelor's in nursing in 1 year. And he finished that. He was a nurse for a while, and then he became a doctor. So I think more of that is going to happen, where we have rapid retraining programs that compress a lot of information and they demonstrate the candidate can do that. And there's a vocational component where there's on-the-job training to finish out the loop. So the good news is that this information, especially if it's online, is getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper to distribute. It's kind of weird that academics inflate like 10% per year. Tuition keeps going up, despite the fact that technology should make the cost of delivering education go way down. And that's because of student loans. The people who buy the product are insulated from the cost of it, the same for medicine in America for the most part. And as a consequence, the provider of it can just artificially inflate the prices way, way high. If the consumer actually had to pay the sticker price, what 18-year-old could afford a $200,000 tuition? They just simply wouldn't. So those universities would have no enrollment, so they would have no customers to pay them, and therefore they would either have to lower their prices or go out of business. But they're subsidized by the Pell Grant and student loan system that we have. So, and given that we have $1 trillion in student loan debt that can't be discharged, even through bankruptcy, it's going to come to a crisis at some point. And I think there's going to be a splitting of the vocational side from the actual academic side. And we're going to probably see a lot of universities go out of business or have to retool themselves. And that's ultimately a good thing. These institutions have become tremendously bureaucratic. They have become very administrator heavy. It's difficult to deal with them, even when you're trying to give them like an amazing deal that helps them grow. Decisions are made in a very slow way. And even though they're slow, they're not good decisions. They're not methodical, well thought out decisions. And also you look at key metrics. If your job is to be vocational, then you should track the people who have graduated, where their jobs are at. And if 50% or 60% of your graduates, especially on the social sciences, are not getting good jobs or any jobs, and of the jobs they're getting, their salaries are lower than $35,000 a year, you really have to question, was there any value for them doing that? They say, oh, well, they learned. It's like, well, yeah, anybody can learn. I can go online and I can get anything I want there. So why are you getting value out of this process? I'm sorry, there are many, many other ways that people can cut it. Join the National Guard. There's plenty of ways to cut that. But lifelong learners have more resources available to them today than they've ever had before. The great courses, Coursera, there's so many MOOCs flying around. I know a lot of people say, well, a lot of people don't finish MOOCs. Well, yeah, because they don't usually have to pay for them. And also there's no pressure, social pressure, financial pressure, external pressure to finish. But the fact that they can sample these things, and even if 1% of people are taking and finishing them, that's still, when you factor all the numbers, tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people consistently studying advanced topics. Like, for example, the Santa Fe Institute's Complexity Explorer. Santa Fe is the world's preeminent academic body for complexity theory. To be able to study there and learn complexity theory from them is a privilege of a lifetime that only few people get to have. Yet somehow I can just go to their website and take courses from them for free. That's just amazing. And lifelong learners have that opportunity, and it's super cool to see it. And I've been exposed to a lot of cool ideas as a consequence of that. How's my brother doing during COVID-19? I think that his hospital has one COVID patient, or they may be self-isolating at home. Gillette's pretty small. They're certainly worried about it up there, and they've managed to get themselves enough personal protective equipment that they should be okay. They have proper quarantine protocols. They have proper treatment protocols ready to go. I just really hope that they don't get hit too hard until April. because then at least they'll have some good therapeutics to treat people who are impacted. Problem with Gillette is the large group of the population is older. They worked in coal mines, they smoked, they lived a very hard life. And that's the exact demographic that, if they contract COVID, dies from COVID. So these are patients who are going to get very, very sick very quickly. And unfortunately, he's going to be right in the middle of all that. And we all have wars to fight. I fight financial wars. He fights medical wars. Friends in the family fought actual wars. And these wars are tough. And so I hope he's okay. Well, that's cool to hear that you're going to write your bachelor's thesis soon on decentralized app using IPFS and Cardano. Plutus Playground is getting a big upgrade here in a bit, so hopefully you'll be able to write some code on that. Let us know. All right. Well, anyway, it's about 11:30 at night, guys. This has been a heck of a lot of fun. As I mentioned before, a lot of good announcements coming. Stay tuned for the 31st. That's going to be a big, big day. Aparna is going to have a lot of fun. Live event. Y'all are going to learn a lot about where we're going. Byron Reboot is imminent, and it's going to be super exciting to hear Aparna announce that. So look for that. And Shelly Haskell testnet's not too far off. And that's going to be, again, 2 phases. One for stake pool operators, the rollover from the ITN. And then there's the balance check to verify that your rewards that you earned on the ITN are ported over properly. And once we've gone through those 2 check marks, we should be ready to go for the Shelly mainnet. We rewrote our listing libraries, and a lot of exchanges are super excited and very excited about the things we've done on the wallet backend. April is really our time to shine for that. And so every week releases are coming. So thanks, guys, for listening. And until next time, talk to you soon.